I hope everyone had a happy Thanksgiving. Today, we're joined by a special guest, Chuck Dixon, the legendary comic book writer. He's also the scribe of Alpha Core. And I wanted to get his thoughts on something he commented about back when the Marvels first came out and we saw how disastrous the box office was. He basically said it was a reason to celebrate. So I wanted to get his thoughts and get a little bit further explanation as to why he thinks it is a reason to celebrate. So let's bring in Chuck here. Thank
Hey,
you for joining us, Chuck. It's really we really do appreciate it. Before I want to pick your brain on your comments here, let's actually go over what happened with the Marvels. So far, the film has only grossed 69.1 million at the domestic box office. It's done 96.2 million internationally and a global gross of just 165 million. Early reports indicate that this film has a $274 million production budget, but that doesn't even include the last year. So a lot of experts and analysts believe that production budget is going to go up to 300 million, and that's even including the tax credit that the film will get from the British government. So for this movie to kind of break even, it needs to be doing like almost like $800 million. It's not going to get there. There's almost no way it gets there at all. But just to kind of look at how it did when it first came out, we saw this 46.1 million opening weekend there. And then its most recent weekend is 10.1 million. We'll see how it does this upcoming weekend, but it doesn't look like it's doing very well at all. The day before Thanksgiving, we saw it just do 1.5 million, a 16% drop from its previous week. And it's kind of been hovering around that 1.5, 1.1 million mark. I'm waiting for when it finally dips below 1 million and basically can just like call it a night. I know it's already losing almost 1,000 theaters this upcoming weekend. So theaters are already ditching this movie for other films, hoping to get people into the theaters and make money off concessions, etc. So it wasn't looking good. So you actually posted this after we got those kind of opening weekend estimates. And you said, this bears repeating because the majority of us are tired of seeing characters and franchises we love sacrificed on the altar of wokeness by people who don't have the love, talent, craft, or business ever getting anywhere near these properties. That this movie is failing so big is a cause for celebration. It's a wake-up call for the entertainment business that they need to get back to producing the well-crafted stuff they used to be capable of. I mean, when a weak cheese movie of a dryball subject like Oppenheimer is out earning the latest popcorn blockbuster, that's us telling them to get their crap together. So, kind of can you elaborate on this? Why do you think it really is a cause for celebration for seeing this movie, The Marvels, fail at the box office?
well, we're seeing a lot of these franchises falter, not just the MCU. We still with the latest Flash movie and Blue Beetle, the DCU is faltering. Fast and Furious, the Mission Impossible franchise, which I always thought was bulletproof, we're seeing that not getting the returns. The loss of China as an overseas market for the most part. Um, you know, it's just it's a course correction that's been needed for a while. They keep putting all of their money into these enormous and increasingly more expensive movies, and they're kind of taking their eye off the ball of what the audience wants, particularly the MCU. These folks have literally said we're making up news stories or using more recent source material because we told all the good stories from the past. And comic fans know that's not true. They barely scratched the surface of 60s and 70s Marvel epics. So I'm just glad to see this happen because all the studios are in financial trouble, deep, deep financial trouble, and they've got to do something to save themselves. Otherwise, it's the end of the film business here, or at least a major setback for the film industry in this country. So something had to happen to get them to change course. Although, will they change course? I don't know. I see it happening at Warner's. I don't see it happening at Disney.
That was going to be my next question: is do you actually see them changing course there? And you kind of already answered that, but why don't you think that you see them changing course at the Walt Disney Company and with Marvel?
Well, because they didn't let all their diversity hires go, their diversity departments and things like that. And they seem to have doubled down by, basically laying off or shunting aside the people that they could blame for this stuff and then just replacing them with people just like them. And they still, when when Disney warned all of its employees to stop talking so openly about projects in progress, films in pre-production and production, it was basically them saying, "Look, you've got to let's keep this agenda to ourselves, this woke agenda to ourselves. Let's not let it go public anymore, because
Yeah, quiet the noise is what Bob Iger had to say, right?
yeah, because you had all these embarrassing emails and Zoom call videos and things like that that really lifted the lid off of what some of these people were really about. And but I see, particularly at Paramount and Warner's, they're saying, "Look, let's get back to making movies people want to see." So whether or not Hollywood has a habit of saying, "Well, we're going to do this," but they really don't know how to do it. They don't understand when things go right and when things go wrong. Particularly Paramount, they have this enormous blockbuster phenomenon in Yellowstone, and they simply don't seem to know how to replicate that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. One of the things that I kind of see and why I think that we are celebrating this is because the stuff that they're pushing is so diabolical and dare I say evil. And so I'm glad that this stuff is failing because I don't really want other people to be like kind of exposed to this stuff and they don't need to see it. So the fact that people aren't actually going and subjecting themselves to this awful these agendas and stuff that they have admitted are baked into these movies. We have Kevin Feige talking about the reason why they pushed the Eternals up to the front of their production schedule is because they wanted to do all of these kind of race replacements, gender replacements, push the sexual orientation stuff, push that kind of agenda, the message, as the critical drinker likes to call it, in these films. We saw them kind of market the Marvels as like this is a female movie for a female audience, even though clearly like they had already kind of insulted a lot of comic book fans by casting Annette Bening as Marvel and not even really telling the Carol Danvers story or anything like that. And then you had Brie Larson going out there and lecturing everyone on the press tour for the original Captain Marvel film. She didn't do that this time. Obviously, there was a SAG-AFTRA strike and things like
Right.
that. But even after she's been allowed to talk about it, she's kind of like really hasn't said anything. But I think the damage was already done. They kind of knew that they needed her to like button up. So that's really why I'm glad that this stuff is failing, is because to me, it's like the agenda is failing. And I think the fact that Brie Larson isn't out there talking about how she wants to like sacrifice whatever clout that she has in order to push her agenda, which is what she was saying with Captain Marvel. She's not saying that anymore. She's not even like saying any of this stuff anymore. That's a huge victory. And I think is really telling as to kind of where they're at and the audience is rejecting them. We even had there's a form K10, I think is what it's called, that the Disney sends to the SEC, where they actually admitted that that's like a major risk, is that the stuff that they're pushing in their social and environmental agendas does not align with what their audiences view on those subjects. And so they actually even know that stuff. They're writing it in like risk reports to the SEC. And the fact that we're still kind of like getting this stuff pushed out in the movies, though, even though they're kind of maybe tamping it down a little bit. So I'm glad that's why it's failing. Because we're not seeing people kind of like subjected to this stuff anymore, and they're actively rejecting it. Do you have any thoughts on kind of that?
Well, yeah, I mean, when they had to reshoot and recut the Marvel so many times that they got down to 1 hour and 45 minutes, the shortest Marvel movie yet. And they have a director out saying that she wanted to make a movie that was 1 hour and 45 minutes, which is ludicrous. I mean, what director knows the running time of a finished film, when they, when they go into production? Um,
Yeah, Zack Snyder's got like the boxes of like the 6 hour Snyder cut or whatever it was for the Justice
yeah,
League.
and what did they cut out? We're starting to hear rumors about what they cut out of it, and it's all mostly woke material, and they end up with a movie that is largely incomprehensible, because they've cut it apart and stitched it back together so many times. I think they lost any kind of through story, and also just the MCU. I mean, the biggest mistake they made was in Endgame. They retired all the characters everybody cared about. They either retired or killed them. And I don't know who said this, but somebody had the analogy I read where it's like if you killed James Bond and continued the franchise with movies about M and Miss Moneypenny. I mean, who cares?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I was always perplexed by the fact that they kind of didn't recast, because I always remember there was kind of this there was, I don't know if it was leaked on Reddit, I don't know if it was how legit it was, but it was part of like the Sony thing, and people had these emails between Kevin Feige and I think it was like Alan Horn at the time, and he's like he was questioning why Sony was recasting Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield, and it's like we'll never do that with Iron Man, or they were rebooting Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield, excuse me. And he said, we'll never do that with Iron Man. We'll just recast. We'll just continue the stories of Iron Man, but it just won't be Robert Downey Jr. It'll just be another actor, similar to how they do it with James Bond. And I was kind of surprised that they really haven't done that. Instead,
Right.
they wanted to go with the Marvel Now stuff that we saw coming out in like 2012, 2013, with the diversity replacements, the sexual orientation replacements, the gender replacements, all that stuff. And clearly that stuff failed in the comics. And then they thought they could, I don't know, for whatever reason, they thought they could do it on the movies too.
I mean,
And
why would
seeing
you
that
do
that's
that?
not the
I
case.
mean, you have tons of material from when the comics were selling to a huge audience, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And why would you rely on the recent stuff that they couldn't give away?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense to me. And I think it just kind of goes to the theory that they were clearly trying to push this agenda, whether that was from a monetary standpoint with the ESG stuff. I know that that's there, or whether, like as we've talked about here earlier, is that they hired a bunch of activists that now run the company, and whether or not they're getting the ESG stuff, that's just a bonus. They wanted to push this stuff anyways. We saw a lot of that with the Reimagine Tomorrow stuff, where a lot of their executives are actually like indoctrinating their children into these agendas, and they want to spread that to other kids. And they've made it clear that even if states put laws out, they still want to do it through the programming that they're putting out. And obviously, Marvel is what like a part of like a big part of their programming that they put out.
Yeah.
Those are like the two things that I look at. So I know you talked about you don't think it's just Marvel, and I think there's some evidence to that. We do have this piece here, just came out from Box Office Pro, Aquaman and Lost Kingdom, long range projections for this movie that comes out December 22nd. Opening weekend range is 32 million to 42 million. That is less than the
Oh,
Marvels. So I think this kind of goes to your point that it's not just maybe the Marvels. It's not just the MCU. You're seeing it kind of like across the board on a lot of this stuff. What do you make of kind of Aquaman and Lost Kingdom here having this? I know you said that you think Warner Brothers is kind of doing a different direction. This is the last of kind of their DCEU stuff. Are you seeing what you like from James Gunn's Superman Legacy is kind of that shift in direction with how he's cast and everything like that, or kind of do you see this as like this is because I know you've talked about the superhero cycle and how it's kind of over. Do
right.
you think that Warner Brothers do you think Superman Legacy can kind of keep the superheroes going, keep that superhero cycle lasting a little bit longer, or do you think it's too little, too late?
Well, I mean, just as James Bond survived the death of the spy craze in the 60s, I think Superman, Batman, Spider-Man could continue on. They're sort of immune from the superhero cycle, as we've seen by their box office. I mean, the last Batman movie did very, very well. The last Spider-Man movie did very, very well.
The
And
Spider-Man movie was huge.
yeah, while everything around it was collapsing, every other superhero film was failing to break even. And I think the cycle's over. Um, that's the problem with cycles is knowing when they're going to end, and they end quickly. And the problem is they've got all of these big budget films in the pipeline, and that they know are going to fail. I mean, that's why Warner's they wrote down the Batgirl movie because they just knew it's not even worth releasing. It's not worth spending another dime in marketing on this film. And you got to think that they're thinking, what else can we do to lessen the impact of this debacle? But it's tough because all the studios are billions of dollars in debt, and I don't see them getting out of it anytime soon. I mean, that's why every single studio has a slate of horror movies in production because they're cheaper to make and they always earn money. There's never been more horror movies in production in the history of cinema than there is right now. And that's a sign to me that they have woken up and realized, hey, we got to make some cash.
Yeah, I've seen that too. Obviously, we saw Five Nights at Freddy's just absolutely dominate the domestic box office just, I don't know, a couple weeks ago. I think it outperformed obviously the Marvels. I did like 80 million, I think, or something
Yeah.
like that in like its opening weekend, and that was when it opened up on Peacock as well. So it had a day and date with streaming too. So we're seeing that horror films can actually kind of break those trends where they're like, oh, if you open it up on a streaming service and then you release it in the box office, you're basically harming both. Whereas like it looked like there was actually some synergy there. People would watch it on Peacock, go to the theaters, take their friends, and then maybe go back and rewatch it. There's just a lot of rewatching happening. So I definitely see that. Do you see, aside from horror, what else do you feel like could be making a resurgence?
Well, I mean, talking to people that I know in the business, mid-budget action films, they're always gold. If you can keep the budget down, most film genres are a matter of mathematics. If you can keep the budgets down to a certain level, you're going to make money. There's an audience for it, and I think that's a lot of the thinking that they're having. I mean, I've read articles recently, but where are the mid-budget comedies? They don't make mid-budget comedies anymore. They don't make movies like Ferris Bueller's Day Off anymore. And even, I mean, let's face it, some of these big superhero movies could have benefited by having smaller budgets. They would have to think a little bit harder about story and stuff like that instead of just blowing cash everywhere on forgettable crap.
Yeah, it's sometimes it just amazes me when I see something like the Marvels, and I obviously haven't watched the film. I don't plan on watching the film, but just kind of seeing the trailers and everything like that, and you just kind of see how it doesn't look very good, and you're like, they
Yeah.
spent over $300 million on this. Like, what are they spending their money on?
Well, I heard one of the biggest problems with these big CGI blockbusters is that the visual effects guy who's overseeing all these different studios from around the world piecing this thing together, they're not creatives, they're not artists, they're just traffickers, and so you end up with this sort of like bland yuck. We're not amazed by CGI anymore. It's actually got to be imaginative and good, and not look like CGI.
Right, exactly. All right. Well, thank you so much, Chuck, for joining us here. We love getting your expertise and analysis on the comic book genre, especially when it comes to superheroes and movies. We look forward to having you back, and can't wait to see what else you get up to with Alpha Core over there at Ripperverse and everything else you're doing in the writing space. I know you also have Sly Stallone is actually adapting one of your novels,
Yeah,
Levon Cade novel. So looking forward to that. You're talking about those kind of mid-budget action thrillers there. Looks like
yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah, it
filling the
is
gap
one.
there. Yeah. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
All right, thanks.